hang on, wait. It's just one more shot. Thank you. Excuse me, sir. All clear? Thanks, and you'll let me have it down in writing, of course. Yeah. Everything's sealed off now, sir.
That's right. Now get him out of here.
Just a minute.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Gas leak and a short circuit. Killed outright.
Short circuit in what, Inspector?
This, sir. Shortwave radio transmitter. It used to be a very sophisticated piece of equipment. He was transmitting at the time of the explosion.
Inspector Williams.
Yes? Frank? Frank?
Who was he?
Ewan Phillips, a Grade 1 courting clerk in the Ministry of Defence, Special Division. On our B list.
You're quite sure this was a gas leak, are you, Inspector? We're not about to detonate an IRA booby trap.
And Sir Phillips blew his own head off, sir.
Shall I remove it now, sir?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Have we been watching him?
No, not until this moment, sir, when we watched the pieces coming down. Apparently, we should have been. This is his code book.
A digest of NATO personnel movements at senior levels for the next 2 months, sir. Ready for transmission. We haven't been able to trace the original, but if he was careful, he probably destroyed it as soon as he coded it. The code book is in his own handwriting. Fairly sophisticated on the whole, devised for speed of translation rather than total security. Our man decoded the message in under an hour using just what was left of it.
This is the first time that Phillips has come to your notice in any way at all?
Yes, sir. Here's his vetting. As you can see, he's as innocent and clean of suspicion as is possible to be.
Now that you know that he was a traitor, is there anything in this vetting to make you suspicious? I mean, looking at it with hindsight.
Well, sir, a single man, living alone, no known sexual or emotional involvement. His friends at his office liked him, but found him a bit too cold for comfort. I suppose he was a little too solitary. That should have warned us.
That's all?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's not very much, is it? I mean, the ministries are absolutely full of professional spinsters married to the job. What sort of degree did he get? 2-1 in maths?
Yes, sir, Trinity Hall.
Well, did he sell out or was he dragged? Is it blackmail or bribery?
Could be idealism, sir. His finances were straight, no irregular payments anyway.
Well, even an idealist has to be pushed or pulled. Which was he?
I'd say he jumped. It's the only thing that makes sense.
Mr. Clark is of the opinion that he was an idealist, pure and simple, handing over secrets because he thought it was the right thing to do.
You don't think so?
I think he had a bank account waiting for him somewhere. I think he was going to start living it up as soon as he'd left the job. I don't know, but reading that vetting, I get a strong feeling of a philanderer inside a philatelist, if you see what I mean.
I do. The Stuart report.
Sir?
7 or 8 years ago, we had a report from somewhere there was a traitor in the coding section of the Ministry of Defence. I'm sure it was the Stuart report. It was nothing to do with me. I was in the Cabinet Office, but I remember reading it. Alick Stuart reported. Don't you remember, Alan?
1967?
Well, thereabouts, Stuart looked into it, said it was all so much nonsense, so we put it away.
Well, I was in Washington most of 1967, burying bodies.
Goodness. We had a disaster.
Not officially, no. That's why I was doing the burying quietly instead of the ambassador in a blaze of trumpets.
Trumpets don't blaze, Alan. Blair, perhaps?
Yes, well, these would have blazed, too.
Can you get records to send me up a copy of Alick Stuart's report on the Tehran investigation? That's May or June 1967.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Did you know Stuart?
No, not well. We met occasionally, usually in committee. We didn't cover the same ground at all.
He's retired now. He lives in Kent. Nice house. A lot of chimneys. To suit his personality. You better read that report and go and see him.
He said there was a traitor in the Ministry of Defence, didn't he?
Oh, no. Somebody else said that. He said there wasn't. And now it seems there was all the time. You go and see him, Alan. Find out why he was wrong.
I hope you didn't have too much trouble getting out of London. It can be awful at this time of day.
Well, as a matter of fact, it wasn't too bad at all.
You know, Commander Ryan, we have met before. I've been arguing with Alick about it.
Yes, indeed, we have. I had the honour of sitting next to you at dinner, July the 4th, 1969, the American Embassy.
Oh, what a fantastic memory.
I looked it up.
Of course you did. If I had to keep your kind of diary, I'd have looked it up too. Oh, come and see him. He's expecting you. Looking forward to seeing you, in fact.
Thank you.
Your health then, Commander.
And yours, sir.
I got Vivian's message. I told him it would be a pleasure. Tell me what I could do to help.
Your Tehran report, sir, of April 1967.
Yes?
May I go over the facts as I understand them, and will you correct me if I go wrong?
Yes, of course.
Late April 1967, your desk got a report from a Colonel Jacobi, then military attaché to our embassy in Tehran, to say that there was a possible turncoat among the Soviet advisors to the School of Military Intelligence there. This man was overtly an instructor in military intelligence, but secretly working for Soviet counterintelligence. He gave Jacobi one or two facts about the military situation in the Middle East, then building up towards the Six-Day War, facts which could be easily checked for their accuracy. And then, as a further inducement, he added a couple more facts. That there were traitors in the Middle Eastern section of our intelligence organization and in the coding department of the Ministry of Defense. You went out to Tehran, investigated the allegations, found them to be groundless, and the whole matter was dropped.
Not just Tehran, Commander. Oh, no. Beirut, Athens, goodness knows where else I didn't go.
Do you mind telling me, sir, why you found the Jacobi information groundless?
Not really. No.
No?
Well, it was a fairly negative situation. As you say, my desk got a note from Jacobi saying that a certain Major Valencin wanted to defect. He offered us information on the military escalation in the Middle East, and then produced this come-on that we were harbouring traitors in our collective bosom. We refused to identify them, of course. That information would be given as soon as we had him securely and safely in a safe hiding place in the West. Probably Florida. He'd been to Florida once and liked the climate. He felt he would be comfortable there.
So he was selling out, not doing it for idealistic reasons?
I wouldn't know. I never met the chap. I said it was a very negative situation. I zoomed out to Tehran as soon as I got the report, and by the time I got there, he'd redefected or been recalled or changed his mind. Anyway, he wasn't there. I talked to Jacobi and got the impression he'd be had. Someone had been putting out ground bait for him, setting the trap, and we very nearly walked into it.
The information about the military build-up was correct. Why didn't you believe what he said about the existence of a couple of traitors?
It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, the gold brick confidence trick. You offer a man 3 facts, all of which he knows to be true, and a 4th which he doesn't know and can't prove one way or the other. And because your 3 facts are true, he tends to believe your 4th.
So in your opinion, Valencin was a con man?
You and I, Commander, are paid to be sceptical. We're the nation's defences against its own good nature. Its tendency to let every villain or political theorist enter our gates or pull the wool over our eyes or sell us a gold brick.
Yes, but usually our scepticism is based on something. I mean, why did you conclude that Valencin was a con man?
Because he pushed us so rapidly when he discovered someone was coming out from London to look him over. Tehran's a political limbo. The United States and Russia both pouring out technical experts, weapons and spies into every nook or cranny not already occupied by the other side. It's a great place for playing scaled-down versions of the war game. I think Valencin sorted out Jacobi as suitably naive and decided to run a hair across the front of the pack. He announced the existence of a pair of traitors, knowing that if we believed it, it would paralyze our operations while we had a witch hunt looking for them. And then, when we were all feverishly examining each other's intelligences and consciences, Valencin would disappear without ever having to identify the traitors.
He was telling the truth, you know.
Telling the truth. About what?
You ever come across anybody called Ewan Phillips?
No, I don't think so. Who is he?
Coding clerk in the Ministry of Defence.
And you've caught him with his hand in the till?
Yes.
Oh.
Valenciennes' information about the arms escalation was correct, wasn't it?
I stopped off in Beirut to check it, as it was. Every detail.
And now we know that he was right about the traitor in the Ministry of Defence.
Yes. I do get the point, Commander. He said there were 2 traitors. And you've only caught one. Very embarrassing.
It was your report, sir.
I can only repeat the impression I gained at the time. I thought he was having Jacobeans stirring up internal trouble for us that we could do without.
Yes, you got that impression from talking to Colonel Jacobi, not to Major Valenciennes.
As I said, Valenciennes did a bunk before I could reach him and examine his story too carefully. It all added up to an elaborate hoax. You don't ask for asylum if you don't really want it. He knew his chance of getting asylum depended on me. So why on earth did he disappear at the very moment he was due to meet me and have his story sorted out? Because he was bluffing. That's why.
Or perhaps because his own counterintelligence boys caught up with him and whisked him away before you had a chance to meet him. He didn't go. He was taken.
All I can say is it didn't seem likely at the time. He had all the opportunities a chap could ask for to make contact and to make sure his tracks were carefully covered. And he was a professional. Everybody agrees on that. He knew what he was doing.
He knew the risk he was taking. He no sooner made contact with Jacobi and he put his head in the noose.
He had perfectly legitimate opportunities to meet Jacobi in the course of normal duty. They both lectured in the College of Military Intelligence.
What was your assessment of Colonel Jacobi?
You read the report?
Yes, but I'd like to hear it from you.
A bit naive for the job. A big, warm-hearted, friendly man, a bit like a Catholic priest. He made you want to tell him your secrets.
Ideal for the job, put like that.
But unfortunately, he tended to believe that anything he was told in secret was secret, and that anything secret was true.
I thought that your report was a little on the severe side, sir.
He went back to normal service, didn't he? That's what I'd intended to happen. I'd known Jacobi since his time in London. Never regarded him as particularly sound, never thought he was right for Tehran. Still, he got the job.
Can I come in? Lunch will be ready in about a quarter of an hour. I thought you might like some ice in your drink, Commander.
He hasn't touched it, dear. He's on duty. Sherry?
Yes, please.
I have to drive myself back to London, Mrs. Stuart.
I'm not interrupting anything vital.
No. Perhaps I might be able to make use of your interruption.
Please.
Oh, thank you. Do you remember your husband having to go to Tehran at rather short notice in 1967? April 1967?
Tehran?
It was the day the car broke down, dear.
Did it?
Yes, of course. I was taking Alick to Heathrow, but we had to get the local taxi at the last minute. He missed the plane, even so.
It's about the only time I've ever missed a plane in my life.
Nonsense, dear. We once missed the same plane twice. At Munich and Vienna, Commander. We missed it at Munich, hired a car to drive us to Vienna. We missed it there, too. Wasn't it appalling?
What was wrong with the car, sir?
Flat tire, I think. Wasn't that it, dear?
I'm afraid I'd been very careless, Commander. Joe came out to fix it. Oh, he's a little man in the village. He fixes absolutely everything. And it turned out that I had forgotten to have the spare wheel mended after another puncture a week or so earlier.
Anything else go wrong on that journey?
My luggage went astray at Athens, but that's all.
Could you tell me the precise date?
Now, let's see. There we are. Oh, yes. Saturday, the 29th of April, 1967.
I'm afraid you can't leave it at that, gentlemen. I mean, I entirely agree with Major Sullivan's conclusion that 2 days is altogether too long for a mere 10-hour journey, but if you assume that the purpose of Mr. Stuart's journey reached the wrong ears on our side, you do rather tend to ignore the fact that they had a very active, a very thorough organization in Tehran who could equally easily have tracked down Major Valenciennes.
Then they wouldn't have needed 2 days to put him behind bars, sir.
Why did they need 2 days at all, Major? Assume that you're right. In the early hours of Saturday, 29th of April, Mr. Stuart is given his assignment to go straight to Tehran and to assess the value of Major Valentine and his information. Assume that your alleged traitor in the department found out that same day. Now, what would he or she do?
Well, wait till he got home, make contact with his master here, warn him of Stuart's mission, and leave the rest to them.
Yes, but what rest? I mean, what else was there to do? Once the Russians knew about Valentine, he was finished. The rest just consisted of burying the body, didn't it?
Oh, not quite. No, they want to take him home, if only to question him. But why 2 days?
Well, for the traitor in London to get in touch with his contact, for the contact to get in touch with Moscow, and for them to alert Tehran. I mean, 2 days seems perfectly reasonable.
Mm-hmm. And why did it take 2 days for Mr. Stuart to get to Tehran?
Oh, someone at this end was putting spanners in the works.
Oh, no. Now, why does Stuart say it took 2 days?
Ah, well, he says that his car got a puncture, so he missed the plane. The girl at the BOAC desk put him on a flight to Athens, which had an hour stopover, during which time he lost his luggage. That held him up long enough for him to miss his connection, so he took a flight to Beirut. At Beirut, he stopped off to check the military information that he'd been given against what the School of Strategic Studies already knew. There was no onward flight to Tehran that night, so he stayed with friends in Beirut, and then he took a flight the next morning and landed up in Tehran Sunday lunchtime.
Oh, plenty of places for spanners there, are there not, Major? Why did his car have a flat tire? How did he manage to lose his luggage in Athens? Why fly to Beirut instead of direct to Tehran?
Why did the girl on the BOAC desk send him Air France, not flying British?
Did she? Yes, indeed. You'd better find her and ask her. Find them all. Major Jacobi, oh, he's a lieutenant colonel now, by the way. Somebody from the consulate in Athens, Joe.
Joe, sir?
It says here, a chap called Joe tried to repair Mr. Stuart's flat tire. Don't imagine you've time to get his name and address, have you, Alan?
No, sir, but I know where he can be found.
Well, bring them all in. If there's a traitor in their midst, we'd better find out who. We can't afford to let anyone get away with anything nowadays, can we, gentlemen?
Unless it's expedient, no, sir.
You may find it hard to remember, Mrs. Chance, but I understand that you were on duty on the BOAC ticket desk on the morning of Saturday, the 29th of April, 1967.
Was I?
I realise it was 8 years ago, Mrs. Chance, but it is important. A gentleman missed his plane, and you got him new reservations on a slightly different route.
You can't be serious, Mr.
Sullivan.
I mean, you don't really expect me to remember something as ordinary as that 8 years ago.
Well, that's the gentleman. His name is Stuart, Mr. Alick Stuart, spelt with a U. It was booked London-Tehran on a BOAC flight BA912, leaving Heathrow at 10:30. You rerouted him via Athens.
Look, I'm terribly sorry, but you've got to be joking. I mean, 8 years ago? I haven't worked for 5 years.
Then that should make it easier for you to remember.
I used to do the kind of thing you're talking about 20 or 30 times a day, every day of the year.
On this occasion, the gentleman was in a bit of a panic because he'd missed his plane.
Well, they all had. I mean, they were all in a bit of a panic. Although not getting there today meant the end of the world, or losing their jobs.
It is important that you should try to remember, Mrs. Charles.
I thought I heard the baby. Look, can't you see? I mean, it's impossible. I wouldn't remember him even after a week, let alone 8 years.
You could have put him on another BOAC flight, BA314, leaving at 12 o'clock. That would have been a direct flight on a BOAC plane, but you didn't. You put him on an Air France plane, leaving at 11:15, going via Athens, getting into Tehran at 20:35.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? He'd have got to Tehran quicker that way.
Well, in spite of the stopover in Athens?
Yes. But as far as I remember, the Air France got in about an hour sooner.
You do remember something then, don't you?
Oh, that was just routine. Something you did so often you knew the timetable without looking.
And I'm asking you to remember a break in the routine. That should be even easier, don't you think?
Well, you're going to sit there till I remember, aren't you?
I'm afraid so, yes.
What if I can't? Can't stay here forever.
You will remember. Don't worry.
Soon find it, sir. It's up here somewhere. I've been looking for that. Ah, here we are. 1967. Now, it should be in here. Let's see, February, March, April, April. Ah. Now, here we are. Mr. Stuart, 30 bob. Going out the job, changing wheel. That what you wanted?
Thank you. Do you remember what caused the puncture?
Oh, not exactly. Nail or something, I expect. I know they'd driven quite a way, so it must have been a slow puncture.
You put the spare on, did you?
Yeah, but that was no good.
Why not?
That had a puncture as well.
Ah, so the wheel that was actually on the car was the original spare that had been put on some time before?
Yeah, I suppose so.
But you hadn't done that?
Didn't know anything about it. If I'd have been called out, I'd have mended it so that they could have it as a spare. As it was, air came out as fast as I put it in.
Can I have this invoice?
Well, providing you let me have it back. I always keep very careful records.
Yes, well, I'll have it photocopied and let you have it back as soon as possible. Now, listen, about the taxi service. When the stewards discovered that the spare tyre was flat, they rang for a taxi. Can you remember who that would have been?
Oh, 8 years ago it was Mullins. Not now, of course.
Mullins?
April 1967, you said? Wasn't that the year they had a revolution in Athens?
Huh?
Oh, yes, I remember that. Had to reroute everyone for a while. You weren't flying into Athens until things settled down.
We?
British Airlines.
But the French were?
Yes.
And that was in April?
Yes. Pretty odd, though. Someone asking to be sent via Athens, I'd have thought. What with tanks on the runways and soldiers everywhere.
He was in a hurry. Now, the Greek coup d'etat, that was on Friday, 21st of April 1967. Now, this was a week later. Things would be back to normal by then, wouldn't they?
No, not really. Security in Athens was still very tight.
I wouldn't have bothered you if it hadn't been a matter of some importance.
That's all right. Nice to have someone to talk to. You get bored being in bed all the time.
You used to run a taxi service?
Car hire, not taxis. Chauffeur-driven car hire. Taxis, you had to have a licence.
You used to drive the stewards quite a lot, I believe.
Yes, I did. Whenever they went out to dinner. Very careful man, Mr. Stuart, even before the breathalyzer. Never took a chance.
You ever take him to the airport?
Not as I recollect, no.
I think you did once. The steward's car had broken down and they'd telephoned you. One morning, it'd be.
No, don't think so.
It's quite a long time ago. 8 years.
I've been like this coming on for 2 years now. You don't remember things easy. It's the medicine they give you.
I'm sorry to insist, but Mr. Stuart was quite definite about it.
Maybe I did then.
But you don't remember it yourself? Mr. Mullins, a spring morning, 8 years ago, the stewards telephoned quite early. They probably woke you up. His car had broken down and they had to get to the airport. Do you remember?
Could be. 8 years ago, did you say, Mr. Stuart? Going somewhere odd, wasn't he? Persia or something, Iraq.
That's right, Iran. Now, do you remember what time he telephoned?
Blimey. Well, you can work it out, can't you? What time was his plane?
10:30. He'd have had to check in by 9:30 in those days.
An hour and a half from here to the M4, then half an hour up the M4. We'd have had to leave here at 7:30, good as.
I'm sorry, sir. It's his medicine. He can't help himself. It takes away the pain, but it makes him sleepy. Sometimes he'll drop off while he's eating, the spoon halfway to his mouth.
I'm sorry.
He'll wake up presently. We've just got to be a little patient with him. I brought you some tea.
Oh, thank you very much. I wonder if you can help me. Do you, thank you. Do you remember an urgent call from the stewards to ask your husband to drive them to the airport about 8 years ago?
8 years back?
April 1967, to be exact.
That's a long time ago.
Yes, I know, but the steward's car had broken down. He had a plane to catch, so they were pretty desperate to get there.
Yes, I do remember. We was just getting up, and I said they'd never make it, and he wasn't to go over the speed limit, not just to catch an old plane.
Now, what time would that have been?
Well, I get up at 7:15, and Bob gets up as soon as he's had his cup of tea. Leastways, he used to. That'd make it just after 7.
You haven't said it took approximately 2 hours to get from here to the airport, so there'd be no obvious reason for Mr. Stuart to miss a plane that didn't take off till 10:30.
2 hours? Never. More like 3.
Ready? Brought my tea, dear.
Here, love.
Why do you say 3, Mrs. Mullins? After all, your husband was the driver. He ought to know.
He's remembering since they opened the M4, sir. 8 years ago here to Heathrow, you had all the roadworks to get through. You needed a good 3 hours. And Mr. Stuart only phoned at 7. Bob had to get dressed and out to where they'd broken down, didn't you, love? That'd take half hour.
You're quite sure about that? Mr. Stuart phoned at 7 o'clock?
She's right. More like 3 hours before they opened the M4.
And Mr. Stuart phoned at 7 o'clock.
And it would have taken your husband half an hour to get there to them?
That's right, sir. I mean, he was still in bed.
So in your opinion, that wouldn't allow enough time to get to a plane that was due to take off at 10:30?
Well, not if they was going to have time to check in and go through passport control and all that. Come on, Bob. Try and finish it. You know what Doctor said.
The girl won't swear that she remembers the incident, not precisely. But she is positive that Stuart demanded to go via Athens, although if he'd waited 3 hours, he could have flown direct to Tehran. As it was, for the sake of those 3 hours, he got into Athens, where there was an hour stopover anyway, and lost his baggage. He may have been in a hurry, but he still managed to screw it up, so he got into Tehran at least a day late.
Seems as if the car could have been sabotaged quite easily, sir. One of the front tyres was punctured.
Bit primitive.
And risky. Stuart must have had a spare, only hold him up 15 minutes.
No, the spare was useless. Mrs. Stuart had forgotten to have it mended after a previous puncture.
And whoever fixed the car must have known that.
Did Stuart?
No.
Or so he says.
Well, could have been just bad luck.
Well, that's a bit of a coincidence if someone set out to slow him down and a puncture just happens by accident.
Not necessarily. Remember, the Soviets would have had to work pretty fast to have found out already who was flying out to check Valencian.
All the same, I think it'd be interesting to know what had happened in Athens.
Well, from Athens he went to Beirut. Any chance of getting hold of that contact of his at the School of Strategic Studies, sir?
Yes, it would. He's on his way home from Tokyo at this moment at my request.
Tokyo?
Yes, he's now on loan to the School of Military Intelligence in Japan. I've also asked for the ex-consul general in Athens, and Colonel Jacobi should be arriving at any moment in your office, Alan.
Revising the Stuart report. About time, too, if I may say so. Not that it did me any personal damage, but made me look like a hell of a fool. What caused you to change your mind?
Further information, Colonel Jacobi?
Oh, you're not saying anything. Well, fair enough. Where do I start?
With Major Valencian. How did he first make contact with you?
Well, we lectured at the same military academy. May I?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. And they stopped me in the corridor and engaged me in pretty meaningless conversation for a second or two, and then he saluted, shook hands, and palmed a note. The note set up a meeting in one of those open-air bars, you know, where everybody sits around not saying very much and making a lot of noise puffing at a hubble-bubble. I went and...
You were taking a bit of a risk, weren't you?
Oh, no, I knew quite a lot about Valencian. I mean, ostensibly he was a major. But as I understood it, his real rank was Lieutenant General in Soviet counter-espionage. I thought it was worth taking the risk. When I got there, Valencian was sitting at a table, half concealed by the trunk of a tree. I sat at another table, as we'd arranged, and after about 10 minutes, when I saw it was clear, I joined him. But he seemed very nervous. He said that he'd been searching his conscience for 2 or 3 years, and now that his wife in Moscow had divorced him, he had no particular affiliation to the Soviet Union, and he wanted to give up the rat race. He said that he didn't think he would be in line for promotion for some years and that he was stagnating. Didn't like or approve of what he was doing. He felt dirty, spying on his friends and his colleagues.
The excuse in the book. Did he also say that he was coming to the conclusion there was little to choose between the philosophies of communism and capitalism?
No, but he did say that he could serve mankind as well in the West as in the East, and that the balance of power demanded a more thorough exchange of information that was possible through formal channels.
How did he seem while he was trotting out all this rigmarole?
As I said, nervous. I mean, half the time, we both knew that he was only talking, and neither of us need to believe him.
And your impression of his real reason for wanting to sell out?
Well, I was still watching for a trap. And then he came to the heart stuff, what he was offering. Oh, I'd gathered that a house in Florida, a regular income and protection for life was what he wanted.
Came out with it as boldly as that, did he? I mean, he just said, my terms are X thousand dollars per annum. Maybe he didn't hedge round it more discreetly.
No, he was fairly discreet. He said he'd leave the details of his life in the West to our sense of fairness, based on the value of the information that he was going to tell us. And that I obviously would agree with him that a certain minimum settlement should be arranged first. Then he came out with his price. He'd obviously thought about it very carefully.
What was he offering?
He passed me 2 pieces of very fine paper covered in writing. His own handwriting. He wanted to give me a guarantee of his sincerity, and he felt that a report in his own handwriting would be just such a guarantee. I glanced at the report. It was a digest of all the Soviet and Czechoslovak arms supplies to the Arabs in the previous 6 weeks.
Were you able to check it against your own knowledge, or was it completely new information for you?
No, it was quite new. I pocketed the paper, said I'd get back to him as soon as I could, but that I'd have to go through London. Well, he understood that, and then he played his ace. He said the part of the information that he would be providing, once we got him out of harm's way in the West, would be the identity of 2 Soviet agents, one working for the Ministry of Defense and the other in an intelligence organization. And those were his very words. The intelligence organization. I asked him for more information, but he'd finished. He said he wasn't going to say anything until he got what he wanted. Then he insisted that I leave him, said we'd been together long enough.
Yeah, it's coming up to 45 minutes at a guess.
Well, nearer to 40, but still long enough to be exposed. He said he'd be agreeable to meet at any other time, but any subsequent meeting, I would have to bring plans for his escape. Shook hands. The last I saw of him, he was picking up his paper and beginning to read it. Then I went up to the office and coded the message and sent it off to London.
You didn't use an embassy clerk?
No, the one on duty was, well, a little inexperienced. I thought it'd be quicker if I did it myself.
You were sufficiently impressed with Valentin to feel that his speed was necessary?
Yes. Well, whatever his reason, he was offering us information of real value.
How did you assess this ace, as you call it?
Well, he obviously believed it. He obviously thought it was important enough to induce us to take him seriously and give him what he wanted.
And you realise it was information which could cause a great deal of alarm in London, if it were believed?
Well, it didn't seem to be a good reason for not believing it.
What was London's reaction?
Well, Balkan, who was head of the Middle East desk, telephoned later that night. He asked me 3 questions. What risk was my contact in? I told him the longer the delay, the greater the risk. He said, did I have any facilities to check the information? I said no. He said, who did I want sent out to cope with it? I told him I'd leave that to him. He sent Stuart.
But by the time Stuart arrived, Valentin had disappeared. When were you expecting Stuart?
Saturday. We thought the weekend was best to get Valentin to safety. If he'd arrived on Saturday night, we'd have had him on board ship by dawn on Sunday.
But of course he didn't turn up.
I waited all Saturday and half Sunday. Didn't know what to do. I thought it was just like the man to take his time. In my book, that's where the whole operation went wrong, and that's where the blame ought to be put.
You didn't like Stuart?
We'd met in London. No. No, I didn't really. Old school tie superiority. Thought of the field operation could be conducted from behind a desk in Whitehall.
Why didn't you contact Valentin again?
I did. I phoned him early Sunday morning. He answered the phone. I asked for someone else. He said wrong number. I said sorry and replaced the receiver. Well, he didn't seem distressed, but you can never tell. I mean, he might have had a Soviet intelligence officer with his gun to his head. Then later on Sunday morning, my regular contact reported that he'd seen him boarding an aeroflot to Moscow with 2 companions. Sounded ominous.
As your regular contact, why was he giving you reports on Valentin's movements? Was that the kind of thing you usually got reports on?
The movement of Russian intelligence officers? Yes.
And when did Stuart arrive?
Midday. Same time as Valentin was arriving in Moscow.
Which left your ace unplayed, as it were.
Well, we didn't have the information as the identity of the alleged agents, no.
And you told Stuart that you thought that Valentin was telling the truth?
I believed it then, and I believe it now.
Which was probably exactly what you were supposed to do.
That's what Stuart said.
I'm afraid I entirely agree with Stuart's report, sir. Jacoby was obviously being taken for a ride. The whole operation, the meeting place, the timing, the means of communication, they absolutely stank of a trap. Jacoby seems to me extremely gullible, quite unsuited for the sort of work he was doing.
Well, there was a traitor in the Ministry of Defence coding department, Alan.
Yes, I know, and Stuart's journey to Tehran took a day longer than it should have done, but that doesn't alter my opinion of Jacoby or his story. I would have put in exactly the same report that Stuart did.
But perhaps it'd help if you could find out who punctured Stuart's tyre and how he managed to lose his luggage in Athens.
Well, the best person to tell me that is Stuart himself, isn't it?
Well, then why not go and ask him?
If Stuart's journey was sabotaged, then the Soviets must have known who was flying out to check Valentin almost before we did ourselves.
The obvious implication being that somebody must have told him. It's self-evident, Alan. That's something I thought we'd already agreed on.
Well, yes, if his journey was sabotaged. Bearing in mind that the number of people that knew the purpose of Stuart's mission were very limited indeed. I mean, Balkan, head of the Middle Eastern desk, Jacoby and Tehran.
And Stuart himself. As I said, Alan, you really ought to go and ask him.
He won't be more than a moment. He rests in the afternoons.
Hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Stewart.
No, of course you're not. Anyway, he'll enjoy seeing you. It makes him feel useful.
You found me out, Commander. Nowadays, I usually nap after lunch.
It's very good of you to spare me the time, sir.
Nonsense.
Will you take tea?
Oh, please don't take any trouble on my account, Mrs. Stewart.
Later, perhaps?
Fine.
So what has Jacoby been telling you?
Jacoby?
If you were talking to me, you'd naturally talk to him as well. That's logical, isn't it?
Yes.
And out of spite or perhaps an overwhelming sense of injustice, he's told you something that brings you back to me.
Ah, well, that's where you're wrong, sir. In all essential respects, your story and Jacoby's correspond exactly.
Then I'm at a loss.
So are we, I'm afraid.
You intrigue me.
Well, let me try and explain, sir. You were quite right when you said that I'd been to interview Colonel Jacoby. And if I'd been in your position, I would have put in exactly the same report that you did.
I suppose I should be flattered.
Nevertheless, there does remain one nagging fact.
That subsequent events you tell me appear to substantiate Valentin's original story.
Precisely. So, for a moment, let us assume that Valentin was genuine.
I wouldn't like to risk my reputation on it.
No, but for the sake of argument, let's give him the benefit of the doubt.
Very well. Valentin was genuine, and there were two traitors.
One of whom may still be at large.
I hate to be dismissive, but wouldn't you say that's more your province than mine now?
You might be able to help us, sir, if you'll bear with me. Assuming that Valentin was genuine, then doesn't his disappearance suggest that the Russians were warned and they were able to whisk him away to Moscow before you had a chance to interrogate him?
It's plausible.
Your journey to Tehran took a day longer than it should have done.
We've been into that.
You were held up by a series of mishaps.
Exactly.
Which could have been deliberately organized to give the Soviets time to arrange Valentin's removal.
Go on.
Well, actually, sir, that's as far as we've got.
Oh, surely not. If Valentin's second man existed and was busy delaying my journey, it must have crossed your mind, or Vivian Carson's anyway, that the most likely candidate must be myself.
It did cross our minds, yes, sir.
You're very discreet, Commander. I approve of that.
Are you Valentin's second man?
No. But I don't expect you to believe that. Why should you? I wouldn't.
Who else could have delayed your journey?
God knows.
No doubt. But Mr. Carson would like...
Won't be satisfied until he does too. I always thought that sometimes Vivian resented the idea of a higher intellect than his own. Does he want to see me?
Not at the moment, sir. It seems to us that there are two possible occasions when the sabotage could have occurred. One when your car had a flat tire, and the other the incident with your baggage in Athens. Can you remember anything more, anything at all, about either of those occasions?
5 miles down the road, Dinah realized she had a puncture. The spare was also flat. You know the facts anyway? You probably already checked them. But what you want, and what I can't give you, is proof that I didn't bang that nail into the tower myself before we set off. Awkward, isn't it?
What about Athens?
That's easier. My cases went missing between flights. I'd have had to have been a magician to engineer that. Although I might have had help, of course.
Why didn't you take your onward flight to Tehran anyway? I mean, after all, your baggage could have been forwarded after you.
Commander, it was a week after the colonels upset the apple cart. Security at Athens was still extremely jumpy. They virtually held me prisoner until my luggage had been located.
Which was eventually where, sir?
It had been routed to the wrong luggage terminal. I believe it was all set to fly back to Britain.
Didn't that strike you as odd?
Why should it?
And now, looking at it with hindsight?
Yes, all right. Perhaps so. I suppose it would be in my best interest to say if it happened, that's where it happened. The trouble is, neither you nor I, Commander, have any way of knowing.
Only two people, apart from yourself, knew the purpose of your mission. Balkan, who gave you your instructions, and Jacobi in Tehran. You must see the implications of that.
I knew Balkan as one of the best men I ever served with. The idea is preposterous.
More preposterous than Philby or Blake?
I'd rather bet on it being me.
Jacobi?
No. Whatever I may feel about the chap personally, I'll swear it wasn't him. When I arrived, he was sweating on the top line, and he wasn't faking. I rang him from the airport as soon as I touched down. He sounded damn near panic-stricken.
What did he say?
Or something like, "Where in God's name have you been?" A bit hysterical, I thought. Unlike him.
Well?
I don't think we'll ever know.
How's that?
It's 8 years ago, and he denies it.
Oh, so would I.
And there isn't a shred of evidence to show that he did anything to delay his own journey. Not a thing.
You still think he could just have been unlucky?
I don't know.
Well, what about tipping off the other side? He had to make a phone call sometime.
When? Night before, when Balkan found him? The next morning, when he found the garage? At the airport?
Well, after Balkan phoned, that'd be too risky. His wife was in the house.
And she saw him onto the plane the next morning.
So that just leaves his call to the garage.
Yes, he walked half a mile back to the telephone box. Mrs. Stuart stayed in the car.
So there's his chance.
From a phone box? How do we prove it?
Well, you'd better let Mr. Carson know. I've been through the transcripts of all the traffic in and out of the Middle Eastern section for the whole of April '67, and there's no sign of anything irregular. So if you can't nail Stuart, it looks like we've lost him.
First thing anybody knew is when Jacobi's message arrived at the coding section. Whereabouts is that?
Well, it's here. After they decoded it, they rang Balkan at home. And Jacobi had coded it most urgent, so they woke Balkan up to take the call. Balkan came straight back to the office. He called Jacobi, then he called Stuart. All the transcripts are there.
I'd like to spend some time with these.
I already have.
For my own peace of mind.
Oh, please yourself. I'll say good night then.
Oh, yes, good night. Mr. Carson, please. Good morning, Colonel Jacobi.
Mr. Carson, sir, you've already met Commander Rand.
Morning, gentlemen.
We're delighted you can be with us, Colonel. Let's all sit down. We thought you might be pleased to know the outcome of our reappraisal of Stuart's Tehran report. You've come out of it rather well.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, in our opinion, he was unduly severe on your handling of the situation.
And with your help, we'd like to set the record straight.
I'd say Stuart underestimated your effectiveness and ability pretty badly, sir.
Well, as I told Commander Ryan, it didn't do me any positive damage, but it was noted, and I lost my job in the field as a direct result.
That must have been quite a blow.
Well, peacetime service isn't as interesting or as demanding. In fact, gentlemen, it's a bore.
You've never had much time for Stuart, have you?
Not very much.
A mutual antagonism, terribly unfortunate.
A bit like a red rag to a bull, then, sending Stuart to Tehran.
Well, if he hadn't dallied and dawdled, his report would have been very different. We'd have had Valencian in Florida, and I'd have got my commendation.
So when Balkan asked you who you'd like to come out from London to handle the situation, you wouldn't exactly have been inclined to ask for Alick Stuart.
Are you asking me what I said, or what I might have said?
No, sir. Now, we know what you said. You said send whoever you like, the best man you've got.
Oh. Yes. Yes, that's right.
In fact, you would have been happy for it to be anybody but Stuart.
Well, happier.
So, what were your feelings when you found out who'd been sent?
Foreboding.
Isn't it odd how people have different reactions to the same situation? Now, Stuart told me that he thought you were rather upset. His exact words were very near panic-stricken.
Well, that was after he'd arrived a day late and the whole thing had gone sour. Valencian had been whisked away from under our very noses.
I'm sorry, I think we must be at cross purposes. What occasion are you referring to?
When?
When you discovered who was flying out to check Valencian.
And you felt your sense of foreboding, sir.
Who did tell you that Stuart had been sent to join you?
Balkan.
No, sir. Now, according to these transcripts, Balkan never mentioned Stuart's name.
I don't understand.
Officially, you didn't know who was flying out to check Valencian until Stuart rang you from the airport. But yesterday you said to me that you remember thinking it was just like the man to take his time. And that was before he'd arrived. And then just now you said to Mr. Carson that you had a sense of foreboding when you knew that it was Stuart who was coming out. So obviously somebody must have told you who was flying out to join you, and it wasn't Balkan.
So who was it? Think hard, I'm sure you'll remember.
Well, it's a long time ago.
The last time we spoke, you seemed to be able to record the events in considerable detail.
Surely you remember.
No.
Was it your Russian friends, perhaps? When they rang that Saturday to tell you that Stuart had left Heathrow, and that he'd be delayed at Athens to give your friends time to abduct poor Major Valencian.
Russian friends?
Yes, after you tipped them off, of course, that unless they silenced Valencian, you would be blown.
Me?
What Stuart missed completely, thing that never occurred to him, was that you could be a double.
That you were, in fact, Valencien's second man. You must have been quite horrified when you found how closely disaster was staring her in the face. I must admire the way you kept your nerve, Colonel.
Yes. Pity we don't give commendations to traitors.